Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar, Value Stream Management, Why It Matters for Enterprise IT Now. My name is Laurel Heenan, and I will be your moderator for today's webinar. Our presenters today are Tasktop Strategic Transformation Advisor, Danny Presten, and Principal Flow Advisor, Chajka. And with that, I will pass over to Danny to begin our webinar today. Thank you.
Hey, thanks so much for the intro, and really super excited to be here. So my hope today for those of y'all joining in here, this will be kind of a bit of an experiment, but I don't know if you're in the same place I've been, where you watch webinars and it just kind of is a little bit, maybe just a little bit boring watching someone present one way the whole time. So today, for your viewing pleasure, it's actually not just me presenting, but Kate, glad to have you here. Is it okay if I call you Kate? I know the intro is Catherine. All right, good deal. I know Kate is Kate, not Catherine, so I'll probably slip to that anyway. But so we'll be having a bit of a conversation around here, but also threw into the chat a link over to a mural board. And so, not everyone has to click on that, but if you'd like to, we've got some interactive things we can do using that tool over there as well. So totally looking forward to starting up here. So let me get my my board here ready to go. All right, so on the mural board, you're going to see, let me share my screen real fast. Hopefully you guys will see this okay. You will see this when you log in. I'm going to summon everybody over here real quick. There we go. Whoa. Zoom is in my way. Get you out of the way, Zoom. All right. There we go. So I'll pull everybody over here to this board, and what I'd love you to do, just so you guys are getting the idea here, to grab a pen and drag it to whatever part of the world you're in. It'll be kind of interesting to see just who all's here, who's joining in there. Definitely a lot of folks. And so as our exercises go today, we'll have some of those drag and drop kind of things that you can do. And again, if you see the conversation heading in the direction you're like, most of these people represent my view and all as well. You don't have to put a pen. Like I didn't put, 100 pens out here for all the different things.
You'll have to release them, I think, Danny.
Okay, sorry. Yes, there you go. Okay, good. And hopefully that's good. So everybody's summoned back over here. Everybody's seeing that? Yeah, there we go. Pens are starting to come now. Great, beautiful, good. Cool. So we can kind of see, man, a lot of different time zones there. We will try to keep you awake if it's late at night where you're at, or super early in the morning. Good stuff. So with that, we wanted to jump into talking about value stream management. So as you're doing that, I'm going to click over here and pull everybody into this other quote. And the thing here, Kate, kind of where I want to open up, and you and the audience can drag too, but I want to see like agree, disagree. So Gardner is saying by the end of 2023, 70% of organizations are going to use value stream management to improve flow. And if you agree, maybe drag a green thumb over there. If you disagree, drag in a red thumb. Well, what do you think about that? Kay, I just wanted to get your impression on that quote. Seems pretty audacious.
Yeah. So my first reaction to seeing this was there was not a chance of this happening in 2023. And I think that's because of what I was defining value stream management to be, ideation all the way through delivery and feedback on that delivered value, right? So few organizations I work with have that visibility currently. But I also hear a different definition of value stream management being talked about, the DevOps version. What is my portion of the value stream? So, really when I start thinking about it, is I have to say, depending on the definition, I think more and more people are becoming aware in organizations of flow from a local perspective.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I think that's just an important thing to pull out when we use the word value stream management. And again, I want to emphasize management. A lot of people will look at this slide or a slide like it and read the word management there, they'll read value stream mapping. And so we're not talking about value stream mapping here. We're actually talking about managing that value stream. But a lot of people will read that and they have different things they mean by, and you're exactly right. Some of them mean, oh yeah, obviously, like from the point that a story is written to the point that it is delivered, that's the value stream. I think you can kind of zoom out. And this next slide over here, I'll kind of pull everybody over to this one. Let me get folks over here. The thing that I'll see here, and hold on, don't do anything on this slide yet as far as dragging and dropping yet. But the thing that I'll see here is a lot of people will be focused on value stream management, thinking about let's improve the development process. But in reality, there's places upstream and downstream that are bigger issues. So if you want to play along here, if you're in Mural messing with us, take a red clock and drag it to the Kanban state that you think is your biggest bottleneck in your organization right now. And it'll be kind of interesting to see the distribution of those as they come in.
Yeah, and if anyone's having any problems getting into Mural, I know I saw Richard on your chat locked down by the barbed wire. Go ahead and put in the chat, like, where do we perceive the bottlenecks are? If anybody's having any issues interacting with Mural.
Yes, all the way from the left, somebody has this great idea, who knows where it comes from. It's going to get some sort of a business case that's going to be written up, presented to the steering committee, and then we're going to have to wait for approval on that. So yeah, and then there's all the other side of it, which I see folks kind of gravitating over there into release. So we've got all the things done, but we're waiting on some team to push it into production, make it available to end users. So what are we seeing here, Kate? What do you observe on this?
Laughing because it was so dramatic as I'm watching this come in, the waiting for approval stage. So that I'm not laughing because it's funny. It's just interesting to see them pile up, funny, not funny. I also liked Stephen's comment, maybe where they're not would be an easier discussion. So some great perspectives there.
So with while we're discussing it with the blue microscope, if you drag that to the thing you can see with your ALM team tool, Jira, whatever like that, what are the parts of this value stream you have visibility into? Where do you see work so that you can manage it? So you would drag that there. So obviously with a ALM tool, you're going to see development work, right? Are there other places in your org? And so we can keep talking as people are dragging blue things around there. So I think I interrupted you, Kate. You were in mid thought there.
Yeah, no, what I was surprised not to see is the release process that didn't look like for approval to, I think someone's point, maybe Stephen and others. Where do I typically see pileups? I see them ahead of the team, the development work. We have that agile, yay, team is developing so fast, yay, agile, DevOps, all these things. And then it also starts queuing up in the release. So it's regardless of industry, regardless if it's a 200-year-old company, 5-year-old company, there are some patterns that we typically see that may not be visible to this next point that Danny's talking about. Everybody sees their little, piece of the overall flow. And it's, we're seeing that it's rare to look across. And when I think value stream management, I'm thinking, can we have that visibility across?
Yeah, and I love, so now taking this view in mind, right? Like most of our bottleneck, like this is almost all red. There are so many little clocks in there slowing things down, right? Or waiting for a funding approval to get, dollars for CapEx or whatever it is to do our dev. That's where, in this particular idea of a value stream, our key bottleneck is, right? That would be that's our hunch, right? And the only places we have visibility are outside of that. Like there's not a single blue magnifying glass that we can actually see that work anywhere else. So then you interpose that with this Gene Kim quote, and it's kind of this scary thing, right? Any improvements made anywhere beside the bottleneck are an illusion, right? So in this particular instance, any improvements we make are really not improving our entire end-to-end process. We may be making one small area faster, but that could even impact another area if we made that too fast. So that's a key thing. I spent an early part of my career in industrial engineering, studied that in college. So I'm an industrial engineer. And it's all about, I worked in manufacturing, distribution, logistics, all that kind of thing. And that's all about improving flow. And you always have a bottleneck. And the key thing is you manage that bottleneck. That's where you focus your time, your energy, making sure you're spending time. And unfortunately, in our world of development now, when we look at that big value stream, up to this point, there haven't been a lot of tools to help us do that.
There was a great question in the chat, Danny, is really when we look at these constraints or bottlenecks, like what do we define a bottleneck? We could optimize the wrong spot and not improve things. This resonates with me. What do we think about bottlenecks?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you think about it, so let's just imagine, I have had this intense craving for caffeine all day. I can't get enough of it. So let's say I go to Starbucks, right? And we decide, hey, where we really need to focus our time is improving the cash register checkout process. Like let's do this cool new app where I can pay in advance, and we're going to make the cash register experience even better. Maybe it'll remember my favorite drinks. I don't have to, have this big long, I'd like a tall, no whip, non-fat, mocha, whatever, right? So we could really speed that up. Well, let's be real. The key bottleneck, and most of the time, my experience at Starbucks or any coffee shop is the barista. So if we're able to just cram all kinds of whip through that cash register, so much so now the barista is even more overwhelmed, and there's even a bigger backup. There's a huge capacity thing. So by focusing on the wrong part of our value stream, we actually cause an even worse user experience or a bigger pileup to get flowed through.
Yeah, can I talk about a real kind of experience that I'm having across a lot of engagements? The thing I hear the most is we need more developers. If we had more developers, we could develop more quickly, right? No, not necessarily. If development was your bottleneck, but it's not typically. It's typically where we see all the red, like we've shown here. And
Yeah,
so what happens?
Real world stories on that, right? I was working this one where they had a development, small sized army of developers, testers, and they kept hiring more because they couldn't get stuff out to production fast enough. We actually did more of a VSM look, and lo and behold, the UI UX team was the key bottleneck. They had 2 UI UX designers that were designing for every single, facing story that actually, had some kind of an impact with UI UX. And so you literally had the entire organization constrained by this 2-person bottleneck. So they could have continued to hire developers and never uncorked that. And another org I know you've worked with, we were looking at their value stream, and they were developing, but then it wasn't getting to production. And we're like, well, do you hire more devs? Do you hire more devs? Well, the key constraint there was actually the marketing department. They had to actually approve marketing materials for any cool new thing that went to production, and so they were the key bottleneck. So that's that Starbucks example. If you keep hiring more and more devs, you're actually going to overwhelm the marketing department, and you even get slower to production. So just some real world stories there of how that plays out.
Yeah,
So
it sounds like it's resonating with others in the chat too, whether it's development or testers. It's like knowing what is, actually piling up to resolve it. Awesome.
Yeah. So in this one, we start to see this kind of stuff where, you wonder, are you focused in the right area? It's 120 days to get something to production, but only 2.5 days of that are actually in development. So I want to take a look at this real quick, and this might be a little academic. So some of you will probably be like, oh, this is great. Some of you might look at this and say, hey, let's move on to something a little different. Yeah, so with that, this is a curve. It's called the diffusion of innovation. What it's meant to do is show how new ideas permeate through society. So like if you think, in the early 1960s, color TVs came about. Those permeated into society. So by the early 70s, most people had that. So if you think through this team level agile, that came into our society, around 2001 was the Agile Manifesto. And so today, I would say organizations that are not starting, at least, they're not doing some kind of a team level, let's do Agile at the team level initiative, they would be considered laggards in our industry. So that's kind of that group there and where that came from. As the teams started to do better and better, there came this realization, hey, and around 2009, you see the term DevOps entering into our lexicon. There's a conference there that was first introduced. Today, I would say if your organization's not actively looking at DevOps or doing something to try to improve flow from development to operations, you're probably in the late majority stage. So most organizations by this time have kicked off some sort of a DevOps initiative. Again, by no means are these fully mature and done, but they're at least in process. That led to this interesting thing where we realized, hey, we've got to actually scale Agile across multiple teams. And so, we realized, hey, development, they probably are doing some sort of Scrum. The operations teams doing that as well. And we've got multiple teams across the organization that we need to coordinate work with. So you see scaled Agile coming into our lexicon. And by that, I mean all the scaling methodologies, whether it's less, huge, DA, whatever, all those things, obviously scaled Agile framework. And so those come into our lexicon. And then from there, you start to see DevSecOps emerge around 2015 as folks realize, hey, it's not enough for development ops. We actually need to secure our systems, include them in that. And so VSM began in the software world to come into that, into our lexicon right around that same time. And I think the realization there was like, hey, it's not enough. Like, let's just stop adding 3-letter bits of words here and make this big monster thing. But let's just actually say, hey, we need to look at flow across all the parts of the value stream and make that more efficient. And so that's where VSM came. And I'd say right now it's kind of in this early adopter, maybe early majority phase, in that I don't think there's a lot of organizations doing real VSM. On the heels of that, just looking forward, is the realization that, hey, while we're doing VSM, we actually need to change other parts of our ecosystem, other parts of our org, and we need to figure out how to do our entire business. What are the agile practices, principles to guide that, or the project to product transformation on that? So that's kind of just a little bit about how we got here in the story. And it's basically just chasing those bottlenecks, a realization that we need to get more view around those, and chasing those bottlenecks around. Kate, what do you think? How did I do on that? Does that track for you? Anything you'd agree, disagree as far as where those boxes are put?
Yeah, I'm kind of torn about VSM. I feel like it's still the way, I think about it. And again, it goes back to what people have said about the definitions of it, looking holistically end to end is, really looking at some early adoption. But it may be the industry too, the types of industries that we're in, but certainly have seen this. And what's interesting is also working with a lot of what we may call laggards going into this digital age that may not have historically been technology companies or see themselves as technology companies, and just starting this cycle of bringing in Agile and DevOps. So it's super interesting to look at it this way. But yeah, it's a lot of looking for how can we really optimize this delivery of value. We've tried all these things; they're all great. How do we bring it all together?
Yeah. So on this slide, if you want to interact a little bit, if you take a pen and put it in the conversation you're having at your organization right now, like what's the main conversation? So if it's like, hey, we're transitioning from waterfall to Scrum, and we don't know how to like put a pin in that box, right? The team level agile thing. If it's around VSM, put a pin in that. So you guys, you're totally getting the idea here. And what you're going to see is kind of where your organization is in relation to other organizations around the world. And then the other big thing you can see here, if you're in the agile community, actually helping with transformations, whether that's consulting or agile coach or scrum master or whatever, you can look at where your organization is on this chart. If all of our conversations around DevOps right now, we're trying to get that going, you can look left and see what are the things I really need to master so I can stay a step ahead of where my organization is, or the typical organizations I work with, and do that. So overall, what I'm seeing here, y'all on the call are certainly like in the know, right? You're
That's awesome.
Yeah, we're looking at a lot of conversations around what's it mean to actually do project to product transformations, and having VSM as a part of that. Awesome, cool. So the next thing I wanted to kind of just pull up here as we're talking is this notion around value stream management. What is it? And so I'll kind of get everybody grouped up over here. But value stream management has been around forever. I went to college in the early 90s, and we were talking about value stream management as part of my industrial engineering curriculum. We traced it, back to 1950s, and a lot of the stuff Deming was doing in Japan around that time. So it's not a new term. What's new or unique is we're actually pulling those concepts into software development, not just the manufacturing or distribution of other things. So the definition here, if you really want the clear definition, it's the sequence of activities an organization takes to deliver on a customer need. So if someone tries to pigeonhole that as, oh yeah, value stream management is just DevOps, it is, but it's bigger than that. It's actually the entire sequence of things. One of the questions I'll often get is what's the difference between my ALM tool and my VSM tool? What is the deal? How do these things interrelate? So I'm going to just kind of pull this out of, again, my manufacturing background. But if we were producing cars in our assembly plant over here, right? Here's our assembly plant. And your ALM tool is going to show the status of a car, in that like a car is an epic or a feature that my assembly plant is developing. So if I need to know for this particular car, that it just had the chassis inserted in, and we've got, we're going to put the body on next. That's what I go to my ALM tool to sort out and figure out, what's the sequence of activities I need to do to develop against my my feature or my epic. And then we may get into, some of those, what's the burn down of that? When could I expect it to finish based on how things are performing, all that. Your VSM tool is a totally different thing. You don't go to your VSM tool to look at individual dependencies across epics or features. You go to your VSM tool, what it's going to do is it's looking at the entire flow of every single car or every single epic feature story in your assembly plant. And it's looking at that, zooming back and saying, hey, while we're not concerned about a particular feature, we're concerned about the flow of every feature, and every feature, most of your features are constrained by, maybe the paint department in this example. And so this is where your key bottleneck is on your paint department. So let's go actually give focus into that paint department and see what we can do to improve that flow. And in turn, we're going to improve the flow for every single story, feature, epic in your ecosystem. Kate, what did
a question that we had come in is, how is VSM different than Kanban?
Great question. Yeah. So a Kanban board is a way to visualize flow. So, back here, this is a Kanban board, right? And so if I could have everything on a single Kanban board and see it all interplay that way, then yeah, that's exactly how you would look at VSM. The challenge in our modern software ecosystem is like up here on the left side of this is in one tool, maybe that's looking at plan view or something like that on the left side. What's the business case funding? Where's it at? Where's it folding up there? On the far right is, some sort of operational tool, ServiceNow, something in that family of tools. There's various orchestration tools that we're going to use to take code to production. There's a slew of ALM tools, Jira, Rally, version 1, et cetera, all kinds of different tools in that space, Lean Kit. And so a value stream management tool is going to stitch all those together into that comprehensive view of how things are flowing through my entire factory. Kanban boards will be used along the way in those various tools that you would use, but there's not currently any tool out there that's going to be able to cascade that through a single Kanban board. So all the principles you'd use to flow Kanban, all that stuff applies. We're just using it across all the tools and across that.
And one thing I want to add there is, kind of looking at that kind of a fractal pattern of, teams use Kanbans and then up to the Kanban boards, Kanban method is limiting WIP, right? That's a part of the Kanban method. If we're only limiting it locally, guess what's happening outside the teams? That's why we see the pile up on the left, the pile up on the right. It's limiting WIP across the whole work in progress, the different methods that you do with Kanban, just applying it throughout the whole organization rather than just at a team level.
Awesome. Cool. So hopefully that kind of makes the difference in where, again, I would say for your life cycle management of a epic feature story, you absolutely need an ALM tool, and there's a variety of those that do that really well. But an ALM tool doesn't do the entire factory floor, showing where flow is and all that. It's really focused on those pieces and parts. And similar, a VSM tool is not going to do the ALM. These are separate tool categories in that space. Okay, so looking at flow, I think it's worth camping out on this one just for a bit. But looking at flow, later today, I've got a doctor's appointment, right? I'm going to go into the doctor and they're not just going to immediately assign me a medication and say, oh, great, you came in here, here's your medicine, leave. They're going to take data, and based on that data, they're going to prescribe a treatment plan. And so in value stream management, we really want to do the same thing. We don't want to just go in and say, oh, it's obvious, here's, apply these handful of principles and you're going to be better. We want to actually get in, understand what's going on, and then, find the right thing. So these are our different metrics we would look at, and maybe we could camp out on these for a bit, Kate, and kind of, just explain them here, but I'll start out with flow velocity. So if we go back to that factory analogy there, flow velocity is looking at how many things are coming out of my factory at a given time over time. So it's just, purely how much of each category thing are we producing over time. You want to dig into flow efficiency?
Yeah, so a lot of times we focus on the workers and not the work, right? Am I busy? This is flipping it, looking at, is the work progressing? What happens and what amount of time is the work spending moving through the system rather than being blocked, rather than waiting on an environment, waiting on a dependency, waiting on information that I didn't have before I started it. So how much time are we spending? How's the work spending in an efficient state? So taking it very different than a resource efficiency type of view, looking at flow efficiency.
Yep. Flow time is really the kind of that measure of things are coming into the factory, they're starting work and they're finishing. How long does it take to make that cycle? So you would look at that for your stories, epics, features, as you go through that. So that's really kind of the picture flow time is start to finish for each of those
If
kinds.
I could there, Danny, one of the interesting things that we see, teams are typically using agile practices like that curve that you saw. People have moved on to VSM by now. We got agile down. Great that we deliver stories in 2 weeks, right? Everybody's on a 2-week sprint. We deliver, but we're still, what's interesting is you start to move up the value stream. Sure, teams are delivering quickly. That flow time on the actual value to the customer is for the most part over 3 months in most industries and most businesses. So it's interesting when you start to go up and look at that flow time from the customer's perspective, how it starts to increase above the team level.
Yep, that's absolutely critical too. I mean, I think as we're part of a value stream, we each have a role in it. It's easy to kind of optimize our part and say, wow, we're taking orders at Starbucks and look at us, we're doing so great. And you forget like that customer experience, like what really matters is from the time that customer places, or actually the time the customer enters the door with the intention to order to the time they get the product they're looking for. So yeah, that's that one. So we covered flow time, flow load. Do you want to grab that one?
Yeah, so leading indicator, right? All these metrics that we use is how much we've completed, how much is done, all those things. But flow load is probably my favorite in that how much work have we taken on? Usually organizations I work with, they've taken on easily 4 or 5 times the amount of work at any one time than they can actually complete. So there's the demand, there's the work that we've started versus the velocity, or basically the rate that we can deliver. And it's like having a traffic jam on the road. Putting more cars on the highway at that rate doesn't make the traffic go any faster. Not currently in this day and age. So that load is how much have we brought in to the system. And that's where we really start to see the context switching, the delays, the bottlenecks, because we're overloaded, and it mentally it's draining too and causing burnout, and some of the things I've seen in the chat so far. So load, we keep an eye on how much load, because if we're not matching our demand with our capacity, our load with our velocity, bad things we see it start to happen.
Yep. So taking that factory analogy, load is really how much is between the start of my assembly and the finish, like how much is actually inside the factory at any given time. And then flow distribution is how much of each category am I working on? So there's feature work, how much is dedicated to that, defect work, how much is dedicated to that, risk work, and then also technical debt. So that's kind of looking at, of all the work I'm doing, how's it segregated across those categories so that I can make sure I'm working on the right stuff.
Yeah, and the trade-offs, right? Because everything that we work on, when we're working on one, it's at the expense of other things. So how these all interact with each other too. If I'm focusing on defects, what's falling? If I'm only focusing on features, am I accruing debt? So super interesting to see how that distribution kind of relates with each other.
Yeah. Danny and Kate, we had a question come in on how would you measure lead time for an MMP of a full value stream?
MMP, a minimum marketable product, I guess is what they mean by that.
I would assume so.
Yeah, so lead time for that, basically what I'm looking at, the thing I'm looking at for that is flow time is the term I'll use. Lead time is generally looking at a piece of the value stream, how long does it take to get to the next part. So flow time, the overall from when we start working on that, or when we've it enters our overall organizational value stream, and an idea is presented for a business case all the way till it's productive, there's a customer using it. So I would look at that, and that is the space that VSM tools live in. That's where you would get a VSM tools to measure that time end to end. So by how would I measure it? I'm looking at the real start to finish, and then I'm gonna have to use a VSM tool or do a very manual process, one by one to get that measured.
Yeah, and I see, we see a lot of talk about cycle time and lead time, and different authors have different definitions of cycle time and lead time on the very overloaded terms. So they like to use the term flow time and project to product, just to be very clear what time we're talking about, when we committed to that delivery through the whole process, across the teams, across the silos, when that value is delivered to the customer.
So overall, what this does, and hopefully y'all are able to start to see how some of the dominoes fall when you begin to get these tools together. So I've been an Agile coach for years. I know, Kate, you have a background in that space as well. And many was the time I would have a leader call me up and say, hey, Danny, we need your coaching expertise because we think it takes too long for features to get to market, right? We got a problem we need to solve. And what we would do as a coaching community is we would jump right in and say, oh man, perfect. I've got your solution. It's Agile. And here we go. Let's implement
Need more user stories.
yeah, safe, whatever it is. But we would jump right to a methodology. And where that was a challenge, and for those of you that are in those roles, you'll probably, this will resonate with you, but the leaders would say, okay, whatever it takes, go implement scaled Agile framework, whatever, make it happen. And I'd come over with this bag of tricks, here we go, we're going to implement safe. And the teams would be scratching their heads like, what is going on? Like, why do you want me to change the way I'm doing? What I'm doing is working great for me. Please tell me why I have to give up 2 days to go to PI planning. And I felt like I was really pushing a methodology. Some folks got why that would help. Other folks didn't. But with a tool like Viz, what I can do now is, when leaders come to me and say, hey, I think it takes too long to get features to market. What we can do now is we actually plug in Viz and say, well, let's look at that and see what's causing you to take a long time to get to market, and actually drill in on what that particular situation is. And then once we know what the root cause is, we can come over here to our bag of tricks and say, okay, to solve, so it's taking too long to get to market. That's because you've got too much WIP and it's clogging up your manufacturing plant. Now let's go and we'll pull in PI planning as a tool to reduce WIP. We can implement that, and then we can come back real time in the metrics and see, did that change actually make a difference in a way that matters? So it gives me a quantitative way to have a discussion with a leader and bring about positive change in ways that matter. Totally different way to go about your transformation,
Yeah.
but it's a much more of a pull system in that.
And this, I think, Danny, this is how I've ended up here at Tasktop, is just so many Agile practices for being thrown at teams, and you get this change fatigue, right? And you've been doing this for 5-7 years. Hey, I'm doing all these Agile practices. I go to these retros. I got to do these story points. I got to do that, all these practices. Yet, are we really getting the the benefit of it this far in? Some people, yes. Some people, no. So how do we breathe some life back into these investments we're making, focusing those chains so that you can see a more immediate impact? It's way more rewarding than doing an Agile practice for the sake of, in my opinion, doing an Agile practice,
Right.
Actually achieving these outcomes.
Yeah, I see so many transformations that are doing Agile for the sake of Agile, and they don't really know why the thing they're doing is supposed to solve a problem, but they're going through the motions of trying to do it. And, again, it's just looking from the outside, it's just completely frustrating and disheartening to watch people thrash in ways that are completely unproductive. So yeah, I think this is the way transformations in the future will all be done. We're going to, actually run experiments that we can validate with data. And that's the way that you set up continuous improvement. By the way, if you just jump right to the circle and say, hey, we're going to, implement the methodology, there's an endpoint when the methodology is more or less implemented, and your improvement's going to falter or stop generally way sooner than it needs to. So having the data and the ability to actually run experiments and, improve over time sets you up in a position you can always continuously improve on that. So I want to jump into just a little bit of an example of some of the data that you might see if you're have some of this access to the information and how that plays together. And the big thing I'm wanting to emphasize with this is you don't usually take one data point in isolation. This is telling you, just like those vital signs at the doctor's office, it's telling you indications about the overall health of the organization that you're working in. So let me walk through a couple of these, and then hopefully y'all can put on your Sherlock Holmes hats for a little bit and think, all right, I just walked into the crime scene. What is it I'm seeing, and what's maybe some of those roots? So we'll jump into that. So I see over here on the left side that employee satisfaction's falling. So they're collecting like an employee net promoter score, and it looks like there was a sharp decline here in the June timeframe. Flow velocity. So this is the amount of stuff that we're producing. It was climbing steadily, and then in June, it's taken a bit of a dive and has continued to fall past that. Flow distribution. So these, the green are feature items that you're working on. The red are defects. The yellow are risk work. So think of these like security patches, things like that you're doing to take care of risk in the system. And the purple is tech debt. So overall, this organization is focused mainly on defects. Flow load. Kate, you want to talk through what you see here in this one? This is your favorite.
Yeah. So anytime I see load increase, flow load increase, my blood pressure starts to go up talking about vital signs. Again, it's in isolation it may be out of context. Okay, so we have so much load on our system, so many defects, so many features like we see here, but what is our capacity to actually complete that work, have it flow through the system? So always using these to say, is that demand increasing? Are we able to service all these requests basically?
And I love that traffic example that you shared earlier. Like that is what WIB is. This is a, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the highway is not too full. We got capacity on the highway, but this is starting to get to be 5 o'clock in the afternoon and the highway is full. And for those of y'all that have to commute in a big city where there's rush hour, you'll know, like if the least little disruption in that happens, someone has a flat tire, suddenly the highway clogs up and you can't get cars through. And that's where like these play together. So you see this, getting to a saturation point, the highway's full. And then now I can have a real discussion with management. Like this is Little's Law at work right in front of your eyes. Here's WIP increasing. And then now it's suddenly impacted my velocity and there's less trickling through. So in the past, I've always had those conversations. I mean, too much WIP is not a new concept, right? We've been struggling with that for years, but I've never had the data to actually sit down with a senior leader and say, look, your highway system is completely full. And as a matter of fact, putting more into that is going to get you less overall delivery. Let's run an experiment, limit WIP, actually focus, take some things off the bar, get them out of our factory for a bit and watch and see what it does to velocity. So a powerful way to bring about that change. And then you can also see the interplay here. Right around that time, employee satisfaction is falling. Now, why would that be the case? Employee satisfaction falling as a result of reduced velocity or WIP, right?
Yeah, so we just I see a lot of stress in this diagram. This is not an uncommon view, and here we see, sorry, I get to do this day in and day out. I'm addicted to this flow, but all these things play together, like you say, and then we're in this debt spiral. We're seeing defects consistently, and how to even get out of, it's managing us at this rate. We're not managing it.
Yeah, and flow time here, you can start to see there's a cyclical thing with feature work. That's usually an organization that's doing big batch releases, releasing, quarterly cadence or something like that. So we're able to see, what that's doing in our flow time where things are having to wait. Again, it's a great tool to go in and make improvements and say, hey, look, what could we do to actually level this out and release more frequently? What would that do to my velocity, my load, et cetera? Flow efficiency is how much value add work versus non-value add work. So here for my risk work, it's a very cyclical. Like you can see, man, there's times when it's very low efficiency and then high. That's usually indicative of like an approval panel. Somebody has to get a whole bunch of stuff piled up. It waits for an approval and then we finally approve it and can go to production really quick and flows fast there. And then it's back waiting for an approval panel. So all these things, you're starting to get a lot better sense of the health of your overall ability to deliver and where to go to get leverage and answer questions.
Yeah, and looking, being able to have those conversations with our stakeholders and understanding like what is causing the disruption. How can we? Everybody wants to know, when is it going to be done? When we picture what does good flow look like, we can imagine consistency is one way. If we see nice smooth flow, if we start to see a lot of peaks and valleys that need to be smoothed out, that's typically where our bottlenecks come into play. Awesome.
Now, I do want to say this is just one screen in our VSM tool Viz. There are plenty of other screens where you can actually drill down and see, which team might be causing the bottleneck or which type of work would be causing the bottleneck. Where is that piling up? So there's lots of other to dig into here, but just as a sample of where this conversation is, and hopefully you can start to see this is totally different than what you're going to get out of your ALM tool. This is, again, looking at that overall flow as a system and where the challenges are.
Yeah, Danny, you just touched on that a little bit, but we have had some questions about, how do you generate these flow metrics? Is it story points, user stories, features, epics? Is that how you're creating them?
That is a great question. Kay, I've been talking a load. I can certainly answer it. Do you want to take that one?
Yeah. So I just want to make sure I'm answering the right question. So how is this data collected? So I love the story point question. Very rarely do organizations story point across ideation all the way through release. Very often it's just the agile teams, development teams that are using story points. So typically flow, when we look at flow, we're looking at those units of value from beginning to end. So what we're looking for is actually units of value. So it's actually a count. It's very common in a lot of any flow, frameworks or calculations, things like that. And so what this is looking at, regardless of if you're in a Jira or a PPM or another tool, is understanding what is your organization, your context for what a unit of value is, defect, risk, debt, things like that. And then configuring it to see how your flow of value in your context is. Yeah, so in some cases, if Epic is your unit of value, then that's what you'd model. If you deliver value with your stories, then that's where you would focus. And so organizations are in very different parts of that curve. They have very different businesses. Some can deliver every couple of seconds, have releases. Others, they're lucky if they can release in a couple months or even a year or so. So yeah, it's all pretty much context dependent.
Yeah, and just maybe piling on that story points versus not, I can kind of take that, maybe drill in the rabbit hole a little bit there with that. But I spent, years coaching teams how to do story pointing and kind of, walking through all those examples. And I think there's a load of value in that because of the conversation it creates. Oh, you think it's an 8, I think it's a 3. Let's talk about that, share our perspective, and we can kind of better elaborate that story or the feature or the epic or whatever it is that you're sizing. However, running a lot of regression around, I can see my velocity and story points. If you compare that to your velocity and story count, it's very, very similar, especially if you're looking at velocity over, 4 sprints instead of just, 1 sprint at a time. So generally velocity, you're looking at that on a rolling average of 4 sprints would be kind of your typical best guidance from Scrum Alliance. It's not just like what I do last sprint, what I do this sprint. You're looking at the average over those. And generally law of averages will play in where most of the time you get a similar mix of big stories, medium stories, and little stories. As a matter of fact, as teams get more refined, with working with the same PO, same team, that PO will begin to write stories roughly the same size anyway, right? You won't have a bunch of 13s and 1s. You'll start to, average somewhere in the middle generally. So this is working off of that law of averages. It's item count, which in my experience has been, really good. And when you're looking at over time across many items like this is. I'm happy to dig more into that though, if you want to do it. But again, test on that. Like for those of you that are working in a Scrum world where you're using story points, just go look at it and see how, you may deliver 50 points on average a sprint. How many stories? And I think you're going to find it's pretty common, especially if you look across a rolling average of 4 sprints.
Some of the other questions that I know where I think we're further up in the chat that we didn't get to, and if we missed any and you want to repost them, one of the questions I had, Danny, was around the relation between a product and value stream. And I think I see some other questions in the chat related to this. Like, do we look at this at a team view? Do we look at this at a team of team views, product? And so, and does the value stream exist? Is it something that McKinsey comes in and tells me whether I'm in a value stream or not? Like, where am I in this whole picture? Any reaction to that, Danny? I'll take a stab at it after.
Yes, great question. I'll my first stab, and you can kind of follow up and go with that. But I do see a lot of organizations just get stalled on the start line. They're like, oh, we got to map the entire value stream and know each part before we do anything. And here's the problem. In manufacturing, I think most people picture it as this big assembly line and things start, on the left side of the factory and make their way to the right side of the factory, and they all follow a smooth course. And they try to apply that to software where, it's just, step 1, step 2, step 3. I think it's a little bit more like, I think it's more like a network. So there's this whole notion of logistics. How do I get raw goods from various parts of the world to the factory? And then how do I get finished goods from the factory to various parts of the world? That's a lot more how software is developed. There's not like a common flow, and we're not producing the same thing over and over, right? Like we produce different stories. If we produce the same story, why are we doing that? Why are we doing it the second time? So I think to me personally, I would say it's a waste of time to start with a value stream map. You have some general sense, maybe that's cool. What you do is you plug it into the tool, and the tool's going to tell you, it's looking across that whole network, and it's going to tell you where the bottleneck is. So almost like, if you were imagining, controlling aircraft across the nation, which airport is busiest, we can see that. We can see which ones are blocked or bottlenecked. That's really what you're doing with the VSM tool. So I'd spend less time overly doing a map. Again, great, just like story points are valuable because of the conversations, maps are valuable because of the conversations they produce. They're not, when was the last time you did a value stream map and it lasted for more than a half day before you found there was something wrong with it? It's like, those are always changing. So that's my take. So you're definitely in the value stream. Plug in.
You are in the value stream. It exists. It's either functioning, it either has good flow or it doesn't, but it exists. And so as people move from a project to a more product mindset, is they start to organize around value. That's usually the biggest distinguishing factor I see. So value streams exist whether you're in a product model or not. And then people are looking at how to make their delivery more effective and efficient. And that's when you start to see they use their value streams to deliver on a product model.
Yeah. The value stream is more a journey of discovery than like a declaration, right? It's, you're in a value stream, value is flowing, there's not an option not to. It's really, where is it flowing? Where are the bottlenecks? Where are the issues? Let's go manage that. And that's the whole point. We use the word management, not mapping. And when we're talking about value stream management. Cool. So hopefully you can see where this is expanding the conversation throughout our organization. So we, a lot of times agile initiatives, things like that start in software development, but as you go, it's expanding that conversation through all parts of the business. And that's really where project to product comes in to play. How do we actually organize? What are the tools? How does finance actually do agile funding instead of traditional project-based funding? How do we fund products or capacity to do those products? How does this affect our marketing department, and how can they work in more of an agile way, or our sales department? What's it look like to have regular delivery of code and not big batch releases where you do the training once a year? Even this will have far-reaching impacts into our legal department. How do we approve scope on an ongoing cyclical basis instead of the way most legal departments, give me all the requirements in one big document and I'll review them all at once. Well, that's just not the way we're going to be doing development going forward. So that's kind of where that notion is, what we talked about earlier, that project to product skill set knowledge base, or the business agility skill set knowledge base. I'm using those interchangeably here. We're pushing those principles into other parts of the org. Critical thing there. And then just kind of following that up here, Mick quote, I probably need to talk to him and get a shorter one so it's easier to digest. But the key thing here is a lot of times our transformations are very process heavy, come in, do all the things, here's the steps, go to all this training. But if instead we can come in and focus on flow, delivering value, actually getting those views and solving problems, that's a reframe. It's a lot less friction to bring that transformation to your organization, and the benefits are a lot more far reaching, and you can actually get adoption a lot quicker because folks see how they're solving problems. They have autonomy to go solve those problems. And there's that safety net, like, did it actually work or not? Like, leadership can have that safety net as they give autonomy. You can actually see, is it improving or not? Great. All right. Benefits here. Kate, you want to jump into some of these? I'll kind of talk with these three up front, and then feel free to add to it as you like to get.
Yeah. So like I said, I ended up here because I just couldn't take the frustration. I was coaching hundreds of people and hundreds of teams, and it was just so discouraging to hear, like, we're doing all these things and we're not getting the benefits that all these great posts and books and frameworks and all these things promised us. It's not delivering. And I had been through lean, I heard questions on the chat. How does this all tie together? Had seen all these concepts start to converge to say, when we look at them in isolation, maybe we weren't getting the benefit, but to see something that put all the pieces together, to see and make decisions for, finally getting the outcomes that we wanted and building upon rather than replacing all the great things that we've been learning over the years. So for me, the increased engagement and energy was a huge benefit as a coach. And what does that translate into? Actually starting to focus on business outcomes. I went from a product company to IT, and it was a really difficult experience for me because IT was just a bunch of ticket takers. They didn't have a view into the value delivery, into desired outcomes, and just being able to have that energy back with purpose and all of these things. It's good for the teams, it's good for the business, it's good for the customer. So obviously I'm very biased on this, this BSM topic.
Yeah, I was kind of summarizing that. You did a way better job of summarizing, reducing that internal friction. And you do see, like, when you're all contributing to the common goal of bringing value to customer, and you can see your contribution in the midst of others, it takes away that siloed of like, hey, well, we did our part, we took the order, those dang baristas, they just can't figure it out. When you can start to see how you're this interplay, it's an ecosystem, it's not just a single silo, we're done. It actually reduces that internal friction. It builds a camaraderie team across the organization, and can be a much improved culture to work in, and ultimately giving you that faster value to customer. And I think the other key we didn't hit on a lot, but we also get the right value to customer as we're looking at that flow distribution. So, oh man, we got loads of defects. We're actually, maybe need to improve quality. Let's go, figure out what the root cause of that, develop some automated testing capabilities or something like that to improve quality. We're actually getting the right things to the customer, not just a lot of things to the customer. So it helps, all in a whole variety of different ways. Great. Okay, landing here, we're kind of close to time. I want to talk just a little bit in closing. We'll have some minutes for discussion here, but where to start? People always ask that. Do we map the value streams? What do we do? How do we get off the ground? And so, step one is getting connected to a value stream management tool. Obviously, Tasktop Viz is a great place to start. I think it's the best in the industry. But get connected into that and start collecting data. And then over here on the right side is you're looking at where to connect and what are some hallmarks of an organization where you might get some quick wins. To me, just starting is key. So, rather than spend a lot of time debating where, I'd say just start somewhere and go everywhere. But if you do have options and you want to filter that down, and maybe there's multiple folks, I would say, clearly you want to start with more than one team. A lot of times I'll see folks try to take like a lean startup approach to value stream management. And they'll say, okay, we want to see if there's value, we want to see what we can get out of these tools. Let's connect up a single team. And, it's missing the point. It's like, you've got this, great lighthouse that's going to give you a lot of visibility, and you're putting it at a pond in someone's backyard. It's like, you're not able to fully evaluate the capabilities of that by just connecting to one team. So ideally you want to connect up to multiple teams working together to generate something valuable. This third one here, and I'll let you kind of take the last two, Kate, if you want, but this third one here, I love to target an area that knows they need to improve and has a clear problem they're trying to solve. I've oftentimes working with orgs, when we come in, it's like, hey, we want to, work on this thing, let's get it moving. And they'll say, oh, you want to go to division X because they're the most agile, they're awesome, they've done everything for years and all that. And I think the thought is, if you're trying to get to a destination, start with the team closest to it. But a lot of times what I'll see is that area, has some internal reputation they're trying to defend. And if they admit a problem, or if a problem's visible, they'll try to hide it or cover it up. So I love starting with an area that knows, yeah, we have some problems, we're, bleeding here, please come help us. And those you tend to get, a lot of quick wins early on, but you also get a willingness to come and change without trying to, overly guard a reputation.
I had a funny story. I had a team coming to me today, and they said, we want to be the best team in the world. Fabulous. Yeah, so I think too is, with all the good intentions in the world, as we talked about, the bottlenecks are very often not in the team. So all the easy problems have been solved by now, hopefully. So where are these other challenges? Up ahead of the teams in getting approval. I think a lot of people had tagged on that. It's also very often, as much as we talk about DevOps, I work with very few organizations that have a DevOps pipeline works in any sort of speed. There's still months long release processes with most of my customers. So those are not easy problems to solve, right? Some of these bigger bottlenecks. Are the teams going to be able to solve these? Who's going to help solve some of these bigger bottlenecks? So it's thinking about, what are the different levels in the organization? Where do we have support to improve? This support for improvement is such a critical thing, an area with executive support, an area that truly, truly, truly wants to improve and will start working. It's not going to happen overnight, right? These are not easy lifts in some cases, but every step that we take from today, is going to pay off. And I think that also goes to this last point. Treat this as an experiment and continuously learn. This goes back to the point, not all change results in improved outcomes. So we've treated a lot of change just assuming that if we do these things, then we will have better delivery, we will have better value, time to market. Once we start actually measuring, did these improvements actually provide us a return? One of two things happens. Yes, we improved, but guess what happens more often right now as organizations mature to this? Actually, we didn't improve because the bottleneck was somewhere else, right? But what happened? We learned something very important. So you'll hear a lot of talk about learning organizations. Are we learning, or are we continuing to make the same mistakes over and over? So this experimentation and learning piece, and having a mindset to be open to change and be open to trying different things and seeing how it acts. These are really important things as organizations start on their journey.
Yeah, so just as we round the corner here, chances are we've got people in all different parts of the organization on our call today, just given the number of people here. And some of you may be in a C-suite area and you're able to, make these changes happen rapidly. Some of you, maybe you're a Scrum Master, a developer, and you're trying to push that change up. What I just want to close with here is to let you know we're here as a resource to help you get this message out. I think value stream management, project to product, is the future. It's where we need to go. I don't see organizations adopting it at the rate I would like to. It's a conversation we need to have. So if you need help getting that conversation out at your organization, we're here to help you. Reach out, let us know. And I've done similar talks to these for various organizations over the past 6 months, where we'll come in, do a lunch and learn, whatever like that. Happy to come partner with you as you try to evangelize this message at your organization. That's what we're here to do.